In the winter of 1658, an event occurred that would be remembered for centuries in Scandinavia. Denmark and Sweden were at war, part of the larger Second Northern War, where Sweden was attempting to expand its Baltic influence, and where Denmark was trying to regain lost territories and re-implement the Sound Toll. The war had become a standstill, as both sides were prepared to settle down for the winter. Carl Gustav X and his army had seen a major victory in Frederiksø, but it was thought they would be stuck and vulnerable in Jutland, as the Danish fleet would defend the Isles when the war was to resume in spring. But January and February 1658 were exceptionally cold. The straits between the Danish Isles froze solid. Then in a daring and risky move, Swedish forces seized the opportunity to march across the ice. They quickly surprised the Danish defenses, forcing Denmark to sue for peace. As a result, Denmark ceded its eastern third, forever altering the balance of power in Scandinavia in favor of Sweden. But what if this almost fantastical military feat never took place, and Denmark kept its eastern territories? And how could Denmark do this in the first place? Now before we move on, if you guys are worried about identity theft and keeping your data secure, I would like to thank the sponsor of today's video, Aura, a service which may be just right for you. This year has seen a number of high-profile data breaches, raising serious concerns about personal information security. United Health confirmed 100 million of their users had their data stolen, the largest ever healthcare data breach in the US. Ticketmaster experienced a massive breach comprising over 560 million customer records. But most alarming of all, just a few months ago, National Public Data announced that they had suffered a major breach potentially impacting every American. The incident comprised over 2.9 billion records used for background checks, including critical personal information such as full names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, and most importantly, social security numbers. It has been confirmed that members of the hacker group have released this sensitive information online for free. If you haven't been taking your personal information online seriously, now is the time to change that. You're more vulnerable than ever in today's digital landscape. Thankfully, you can feel secure with Aura. Aura monitors your personal data, including your social security number, across billions of data points like the dark web and public court records to alert you about potential identity theft. They also provide up to $5 million in identity theft insurance in case the worst happens. Plus, Aura offers a variety of other features to keep you safe online, including real-time alerts for data breaches, VPN for secure browsing, data broker opt-outs to stop companies from selling your personal information, password manager to help you create and store strong passwords, and more. If you don't want to leave yourself vulnerable to data breaches or identity theft, click the link in my description or go to aura.com/neatlink to try 2 weeks for free. That'll be enough time for Aura to find out if any of your personal information is exposed. Denmark was overly ambitious, refusing to acknowledge that its days as the singular dominant power in the Baltic were over. So instead of declaring war on Sweden during the Second Northern War, Denmark takes a more diplomatic approach and phases out the Sound Toll. The French, English, and Dutch frequently traded in the Baltic and weren't particularly big fans of the Sound Toll. So this would not only have avoided war with Sweden during the harsh winter, but also granted Denmark more favor with the great powers. This changes the Second Northern War. Without the Danish intervention, Sweden can focus more resources on Poland and its goal of conquering Royal Prussia. Facing powerful rivals, they achieve far from all their goals, but Sweden expands further in the east, being granted the rest of historical Livonia and establishing a small dominion in Royal Prussia. This doesn't have massive implications globally. Sweden is still strong enough to play its part in European history, but it changes Scandinavian history quite a bit as Denmark isn't crippled like in real life. During the broader Franco-Dutch War, the Halland War breaks out between Denmark and Sweden, as Sweden refuses to end its agreed-upon 30-year occupation of Halland. Here Denmark-Norway just barely squeaks out a victory, regaining the province. But the Swedish Empire would remain the most powerful force in the Baltic for decades. That is, until the Great Northern War. Swedish expansion, while not as detrimental to Denmark in this scenario, was still severely limiting Russian and Polish power in the Baltic. Sweden's impressive professional army would fight tooth and nail for the Empire's survival, but in the end, a Sweden that is in a slightly weaker position would face a slightly worse fate. The coalition puts an end to the Swedish Empire, and Sweden is reduced to its core territories, not even keeping Pomerania. This was around when the constant warring between Denmark and Sweden died down in real life, and it would be in this scenario as well. The two kingdoms would now be relatively close in power. Denmark doesn't have any lost territories it's bitter about, and Sweden had already tried and failed in becoming a great power. So the relationship between Denmark, Norway, and Sweden improves. In the War of the Hats, Russia in real life considered establishing an independent Finnish kingdom as a buffer state, with Sweden posing less of a threat. An independent Finland under Russian influence could more realistically provide a buffer zone, so the Kingdom of Finland is established, with Adolf Frederick of Holstein, who in real life became King of Sweden, as sovereign. This entirely alters the line of succession in Sweden, and on top of that, the power of the Swedish monarchy is also diminished post-war, resulting in a stronger nobility and parliament. This in turn means that by the Napoleonic Wars, A pacifist parliament and figurehead king are in power in Sweden, which has profound implications. A more pacifist parliament-led Sweden approaches the conflict in a manner similar to Denmark, opting for neutrality and maintaining sovereignty. With its improving relations with Denmark-Norway, they even form a pact of neutrality, agreeing to defend one another should any outside power threaten their sovereignty. Finland too joins this pact. But this doesn't deter Britain from attacking Copenhagen and capturing the Danish fleet, just as in real life. In this scenario, however, it doesn't just force Denmark-Norway, but also Sweden and Finland to join Napoleon. This doesn't change the outcome of the broader conflict, but there are changes regionally, with Norway achieving self-governance and increased autonomy, but remaining a part of the Danish realm through the monarchy and shared defense, as there was no motive to grant it to Sweden, given they also joined Napoleon. Throughout the 1800s, the Scandinavianism movement arises, much like in real life. But just like in real life, the Second Schleswig War would begin in 1864, as Denmark attempts to integrate Schleswig into Denmark proper, which Prussia would use as a casus belli to invade. Despite closer ties, Sweden would still refuse to come to Denmark's aid, as Swedish officials would be even more pacifist than in real life at this point. This would temporarily end the Scandinavian unification movement, but the outcome of the Second Schleswig War would be different. Denmark would put up a much stronger defense with its larger population and Norwegian assistance. This would deter Prussia from invading southern Jutland or Schleswig. Oversimplifying, the Schleswig issue boiled down to what to do with this very diverse territory, as it was majority Danish at the time, but had a significant German minority throughout, especially in the south and in major towns. Denmark wanted to give up Holstein, leaving it to a future united Germany, in the hopes of then keeping just Schleswig as a core part of the kingdom. In real life, the gamble didn't pay off, but in this scenario, with Denmark being in a much stronger position, it does, and the border between Denmark and Germany ends up further south along the Eider Canal. As relations between Denmark and Germany would be somewhat tense, the construction of the Kiel Canal is not as feasible, as half of it would be shared territory and require cooperation on both sides. Instead, Germany expands the Lübeck-Elbe Canal to accommodate larger ships. Meanwhile, Denmark replaces the old Eider Canal with a much wider canal entirely in Danish territory. Norway gains its independence in the early 1900s, electing a Danish prince as their king, much like in real life. Denmark is neutral during the First World War, but invaded during the Second. Instead of surrendering after 6 hours, Denmark puts up a fight for a few days, with the last holdouts on the European mainland being in the forests of northern Scania. The monarchy and government flee to Iceland, where they help the resistant movements in Denmark and Norway throughout the conflict. By the modern day, the world is much the same, but the Nordic countries are quite different. Ties between the countries are closer, with the Gothenburg being a melting pot of the 3 Scandinavian languages. Based on the mixed Danish, Swedish, and Norwegian dialects spoken in this region, a standardized Scandinavian language is introduced and taught in schools, making Scandinavian one language with just 3 distinct dialects. Denmark in 2024 is the most populous Nordic country. Scanians of course remain Danes in this scenario, adding another whole third to the broader cultural regions of Denmark, altering the country and language noticeably. Western Scania would in large part be an extension of Copenhagen economically and in terms of dialect, with several bridges crossing the sound a lot earlier than in real life. But further east it transitions into more distinct dialects resembling the real-world Bornholm dialect. Southern Jutland or Schleswig would have a very different linguistic landscape compared to real life as well. As it is fully integrated into Denmark, the shift towards German, primarily through formal education having been in German, would be halted and then reversed as Danish became the language of education. Danish is the majority language everywhere, but significant minority languages still exist. North Frisian is more widely spoken than in real life, as it was standardized and recognized earlier, and Eiderdutch, distinct from Standard High German, would also be widely spoken. Eiderdutch descends from Plattdeutsch, or Low German, historically spoken all across northern Germany. Sweden, meanwhile, is the second most populous Nordic country. This Sweden is much more centered around Stockholm and Mälardalen than in real life, with Gothenburg and its southwest being a region of cultural blending between Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Norway, having been a part of Denmark for longer and not faced the same Swedish influence, shares slightly more culturally and linguistically with its southern neighbor. Finland, meanwhile, has much more in common with Sweden and is significantly more bilingual. Instead of Swedish becoming a minority language in its coastal regions, it developed into its own Finnish Scandinavian dialect, which is a primary language spoken by almost all Finns alongside Suomi, the Uralic Finnish language. But that's about all for now. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more content like this in the future. See you next time.